All right. Well, it's another day in paradise. It's September 11th. We should probably take a moment to remember where were you on September 11th? I was sitting in my house working, had the news on, and all of a sudden a jet hits a building and the camera comes and goes, "There's a smoke in this building." It's like surreal, totally surreal, amazing.
We all remember I was in Houston with a boarding pass trying to board a plane. And I didn't realize initially what was happening. And the woman said, no, it's not going. I said, no, I've got a boarding pass. She said, no, the flight's cancelled. Then it gradually began to dawn. Luckily, I got into a hotel somewhere. And then I was on the rest of the day doing radio. I was connected with the radio outfit at the time. And it was something to remember, yes.
Yeah, I'll go around and we'll reminisce real quick, but we have a great guest today and there's so much going on. I'm sure everybody saw the debate last night and the stock market and the predictions of what's going to happen and all kinds of changes going on with infrastructure and the power grid and the growth of EVs and Time Magazine had a list of the top 100 AI companies and the influencers, and somehow they missed out Elon Musk, who was in the magazine last year, but they took him out this year. Wonder why. Man, there is so much going on. John Butler is in the middle of so many startups. But before we get started, let's have our own John Sibley Butler play some music, and he's showing a new haircut.
Whatever. Virgil Kane is my name, and I served on the Danville train till Stonewall's cavalry came and tore up the tracks again. In the winter of '65, we were hungry and barely alive. By the time the 10th Richmond fell, it's a time I remember oh so well. The night they drove old Dixie down, and all the bells were ringing. Like my father before me, I am a working man. And like my brother before me, I took a river sand. He was just 18 and brave, but a Yankee put him in his grave. I swear by the blood that's at my feet, you can't raise a cane when it's in defeat. When the night they drove Dixie down.
Woo!
How you guys doing tonight?
All right, Johnny, I haven't heard that one.
Yep.
John Butler, how are you, sir? Where were you 9/11 a few years ago?
9/11, I was in my office and at home, and my wife said, "You better turn the television on." And of course, I had an appointment, I had a president appointment from President Bush. And so I went in and I immediately called Clay Johnson, who was running the White House. And I said, "Clay, what's going on?" And he said, "Well, I'm going down to the basement." I said, "Where the president?" He said, "I don't know, he's flying around. I think he's landing in Shreveport." And so I ran the Fulbright for America, right, at that time. So my immediate response was, okay, where are the Fulbrighters, and what are they doing, and are they all safe? So I was in a unique position as having a president's appointment from President Bush to help run the Fulbrights. And I was trying to call everybody I could, but everybody had gone. Condoleezza had gone to the basement, but Clay Johnson, who was, as I said, running the White House there, and W's the president's great friend. It's a day to remember, and the good news is, I had Clay had talked about me being secretary of the Army, and they had said, well, you know, it's only ceremonial. Right. And then bam, it happened. So it was a bad day in my life. It was a bad day in America's life. And from an intellectual point of view, I don't ever remember a group coming to America to destroy America. America has been very, very open to groups from around the world, all ethnic groups, all racial groups from around the world. And this is my first time it dawned on me that nobody had ever come to America to destroy America. So it was quite an interesting time.
Absolutely. I want to spend some time introducing you, Ryan, and talking about what we want to talk about. But where were you in 9/11 a few decades ago?
You guys might find this a little shocking. I was actually in my house in Winnipeg, Manitoba. That's where I came from originally before coming down to the U.S. Getting ready to go to school, believe it or not. I was still finishing my last year of of college, which in communications engineering, which is my background. That's what got me introduced into this whole amazing market that we're in. And again, as a Canadian, I'd say, didn't know all the ins and outs, I'd say politely, in terms of what was behind the conversation, what was driving, the impetus for such a devastating, day and sequence of events. But came to learn it really, really quick. I remember like it was yesterday, as I'm sure you all do too. I mean, it's just one of those events in history that you can't help but have that emotional connection to, for unfortunately all the wrong reasons. But now I'm here. I'm down in the U.S. Paying attention a lot more, I'd say, to the bigger picture of what drives not just the economy but society and the politics associated and stuff with it. And yeah, I'll never forget. I'll tell you that.
Yeah. Well, we're delighted that you're here, Ryan. Ryan Gerbrandt is the Chief Operating Officer, the Chief Cheerleading Officer, the Chief Traveling Officer, the Chief Deal-Making Officer at Anterix. The man doesn't sleep. We're going to be with him and talk about how we're going to change the power grid that I started calling smart grid in 2004. Anterix is building the foundation for smart infrastructure, smart cities, and smart communities by delivering transformative broadband that enables the modernization of critical infrastructure for energy, transportation, logistics, and other mission-critical industries. Welcome, Ryan.
Thank you.
So, Ryan, let's get started by helping everybody understand, is Anterix a carrier? Is Anterix a device company? What is Anterix?
Great question, Andres. I like to think of us as an enabler, problem solvers, community gatherers, as I think about the role that we play. And, Andres, you've seen the journey right since the beginning. There's so many stakeholders, there's so many active and some inactive participants to be able to help put these pieces together. And I remember I told this to Rob Schwartz, our CEO, when I first came into the company. I'm like, God, we're not in the spectrum company. We're in the solutions outcomes business, right? And I'd say we've kind of embraced that as the philosophy of what we've done all along the way. It's I remember sitting down with some friends at utilities when I first came in, trying to explain what we were going to do. And it was what's an LTE? What's a PLTE? Was kind of the first instinctual answer that I got. And these people I respected that have built networks, and I thought would have a good solid idea, but to come from there to where we are now, in the enablement of the discussion around the role that wireless broadband plays as a complement to the other communication technologies that utilities use, the ecosystem that we've built around it. Last I checked, there's like 115 or 120 companies, that we're working with in that space. To Utility Broadband Alliance, to no joke, just an hour ago, I got off of our quarterly meeting with our Utility Strategic Advisory Board, that's got 10 C-level executives, of the very utilities that we're going to be talking about, brainstorming on, kind of just how critical these systems are and how do we ensure that we get maximum benefit for society, right, for the utilities and for the customers that they serve, by bringing this digital infrastructure, into the grid. And it's a privilege, to have the ability to play a role, in something much bigger than just what we are. I mean, obviously at the heart of Anterix is spectrum, and can't overstate how important that is to unlocking this opportunity. It's a scarce resource, and has one that I take a lot of pride in the work that my predecessors did to be able to bring it to the market, Morgan O'Brien and team. But now being able to utilize it and make it important and valuable, and drive outcomes and solutions, like I said, is where I spend my time thinking.
Absolutely. And so real quick, Ryan, kind of play back for us, what we all know in the inner circles, but for the audience, you guys have been collaborating. I would argue you are the conductor of a symphony that it started with a couple of trumpets and nobody else was playing, and you're gathering the different instruments, and the whole thing is starting to play a little music, and it sounds good. Who's joined up? Who's publicly said, okay, we're building this, we're doing this?
Yeah, so we're now working officially, and that means their networks are in construction and or some phase of the life cycle with 7 utilities. And the stat that I like to use is it's not just 7 utilities. We got now private wireless networks being built in 15 states, in the US. And where our CTO made this comment that comes from the FirstNet background, wireless carrier background, and put it in perspective of the national carriers. If you combine the footprint of wireless networks being built in aggregate, would be the 4th largest carrier in the nation. And I think it gives you some perspective of the scale of what we've been able to achieve already, even though, as we were reminiscing to get started, Andres, it's still the early innings. I mean, there's a lot of work to be done to be able to take it from there to a national value proposition that I truly believe exists. But our latest was they're near and dear to you all. Encore Electric joined into the conversation here a couple months ago, I guess now officially. And you're right with kind of the activities going on in Texas, and it excites me with the relationship between them and LCRA. And just there's a lot of things that are, as you guys know, unique about the Texas grid, but I think are representative of relationships between entities that can be a real positive influence, frankly, on some other places in the country. To be able to find and demonstrate value of cooperation and the role between the IOU and municipalities and co-ops and all those kinds of things. But so, yeah, we've come a long way, in the journey to see them building, and it's exciting now. It's the early movers, the Amerins, the San Diegos, are getting later in the life cycle of these systems implementations, and these take time. It doesn't happen overnight to be able to build a piece of infrastructure this big. But are putting devices out there, connecting to applications. This was a conversation we were having with the advisory board about how do we ensure kind of a seamless experience as we get beyond just building stuff, to actually using stuff, right? And being able to find a good path to maximize the value of the applications. And frankly, this is where the connection comes into the future of data, right? If you think of it as a digital architecture, is really what LTE is enabling. And the devices and then the data that's going to be prevalent on these systems, this is the time to be thinking about how to put the technology in place to ensure that that data is usable to train the industrial AI agents and applications that are going to be coming. I draw the correlation that sometimes I feel like we're building the internet for the first time, right? What it must have felt like when building the first fiber optics across the country or whatever it is. We're very much doing that for utilities, right? We're putting in systems, foundational, fundamental systems that are going to be there for decades, and we can't even fathom, I think, what it's going to unlock 10 years from now or 15 years from now.
Absolutely.
Ryan,
Anybody?
how you doing? I'm gonna continue the conversation I had last night with Robert D. Kaplan. I was invited to a dinner with Bobby Inman, who was former CIA director, and Bill Cunningham, former chairman of the University of Texas, Jay Hartzell, president of the University of Texas. And Robert Kaplan, if you don't know him, he's been doing books on on foreign affairs and security for years. I think he wrote The Loom of Time, The Tragic Mind about Kissinger, and The Revenge of Geography. And it was quite an interesting discussion. And we talked about security. And in that discussion came up the whole idea of the internet and electricity, and how maybe vulnerable we are as a power, as Kaplan would say, an empire, to the world. So my question is, as you plug in and put the different elements together of the grid and improve the grid, talk to me about security, international security, communications around the world, the impact that the grid will have. And is it true that we are really, really at our biggest, what can we say, tragedy, if just one thing goes down in terms of everything from travel and to how we do business? And let me just add that Robert his book on The Loom of Time, I read most of the stuff before I met with him. I did mention Llewellyn King to him. Of course, he knew Llewellyn. And just comment on that. You know, as we do all of this and all of a sudden there's a tragedy or 9/11 that's global, how do you see the security of what you're doing now?
I mean, it's imperative. Honestly, my assessment is there's a fragility still there, right, to what we're building, the current systems. But to your point on national security, I mean, we've engaged in some of these conversations with several stakeholders through the years. I've always described, you know, of all the critical infrastructure sectors, you know, as energy as being the most critical of critical infrastructure sectors, given the interdependency that exists across almost all of them, right? You know, and it gets even more profound, you know, when you're driving electrification of everything, including transportation. And that I'll say in the rounds that we're in, security isn't talked about enough in terms of just how vulnerable we are, and you know what we need to be doing proactively to be able to help, you know, put and resolve some of the more fundamental issues that exist. I mean, wireless, let me just intersect it with kind of what we do, you know, absolutely plays a role, you know, and particularly the ability to build a private network, you know, and the control that comes with that. Because as we know, I mean, the internet, you know, is just a source of potential vulnerability, right? You know, sharing the very communications medium, you know, with the people in the nation states that could have interests to harm, you know, is not a protective measure. You know, it's an enablement mechanism, and then builds reliance on organizations to put, you know, far more advanced layered security technologies in place with the acceptance that, you know, the bad actor could potentially be already in your infrastructure. And, you know, and so we've been, you know, resonating on that point in terms of build security in layers, you know, with a private controlled piece of infrastructure being a fundamental and core part of that, to give you at least a barrier, you know, on the information access side of the world to the very, you know, critical devices that you want to control. But it can't stop there. I mean, an activity that we launched, you know, to be additive to that, you know, was something we call a collective or a working group. And this is a focused part of the organization that we have in our ecosystem, where we've specifically brought together, you know, some world-leading security technology companies to think more proactively, not just about their domain area, you know, that in security is a really diverse landscape. I'm sure you've studied it well, John. It's just there's a lot of players that do a lot of very specific things really, really well. You know, and the reality of enterprise security, it's those applications and security use cases in combination that's really profound, you know, that really drives a secure piece of infrastructure. And our goal with bringing them together was to help facilitate a conversation amongst these experts, to be able to better map a solution that fits together on all quadrants of the security layer, architecture and being able to share that knowledge and ultimately drive a technology roadmap with the companies that help solve the problem for utilities. But yeah, it's an ongoing question. And I liken it to things like wildfires and stuff, John, that unfortunately, I'd say as an energy community, we tend to wait for a disaster, like the 9/11s and stuff, to cause a conversation. And it's getting ahead of that, is something that we got to keep trying to drive and educate and communicate. We don't have to wait, for the doomsday, or the really bad situation, to be able to drive it. We can get ahead of these things, being able to help be proactive with putting some of these solutions in place.
Yeah, thank you very much. One follow-up, if you don't mind. What the discussion with Robert Kaplan revolved around was, of course, how the countries are being really, squished together. The whole idea of isolationism to him it's an old term. And it looks like to me that who has the internet and how it operates and the ramification for electricity now worldwide. And remembering, of course, that we had the ocean between us for so long. And he's a geopolitical guy, so he talks a lot about the geopolitical stuff. So do you see in any case where the absence of the internet, not the presence of the internet, or the absence of electricity would be a threat to America?
It's a good question. I mean, the dependence, I mean, I start there in my head, kind of where we're going, and the importance of the reliability, almost the essential service, that energy, electricity is coming, is kind of a core tenet of what drives the need and the support and all the different reasons why we're trying to drive innovation and try to take it to the next step. The relationship, though, between that and the connection to, kind of, as you said, kind of across the pond, countries and stuff like that, I see more at the technology level is what my lens is. Being able to see supportive examples. My past actually came from doing actually more international work than I did domestic work in the energy space, and saw a more positive relationship, frankly, between the entities that we had, in Europe, and I did a lot of work in Southeast Asia, who frankly have, let's face it, there's different regulatory, different financial environments, that some of those different countries and utilities operate in. We're able to do things, and support levels of innovation that, have to go through different processes here in the US. And, that was, I'd say, a positive kind of reinforcement to what I saw overall with those relationships.
Okay, thank you very much.
Llewellyn.
Brian, during the time that Anterix has been active with utilities, there have been technological changes. The first one was 5G came along, and now utilities are washing potential and sometimes already applied uses of artificial intelligence. I'm just working on a briefing for the United States Energy Association, which will be on artificial intelligence, and it being used throughout utilities, and more so will happen for everything from managing nuclear fuel to fire suppressant and surveillance, and of course the obvious ones like managing distributed energy resources. Very complex organizations lend themselves to a certain degree of AI management. How is AI impacting you, and what will the effect on communications be?
Yeah, no, great question. I'd put it into kind of two perspectives, Llewellyn. There's a demand impact to the utilities that we know, right? And that's the data center side of the world. And as we've seen in the last few years, there's a demand curve cycle playing out. Now, where we intersect with demand, obviously, we're not doing the telecom, into a data center or anything like that. They're laying fiber, putting that side of the broadband story together. But equivalent with the demand surge, comes a requirement to continue to pursue efficiency, right? And try to find, a more efficient use of the energy capacity that we have. Because, I mean, face it, with the demand cycle of just some of these super localized data centers, you really just can't build generation fast enough, right? And we have to be smarter and more efficient about where every kilowatt goes, and bring programs. This is just one example of many, but bring programs again. We've all lived through the demand response cycle, right? Bring better information and technology into the hand of the consumer to help them use their energy more efficiently, which in turn creates more supply for some of the other uses. And so we do find a relationship there to telecom, and that's a large data and control problem, right? It's a very complex landscape of putting all the pieces in, and having the ability to empower consumer that way. It could arguably be an artificial intelligence application as well, right? The complexity that lives in that landscape is something that I don't truly believe an individual human is necessarily going to be operating the the control board fast enough or in real time enough to be able to deal with some of those situations. And that gets kind of the second side that we see is, I kind of made the analogy earlier about the role I feel like we're playing building the internet for utilities. It's to truly get to a value proposition in the land that we play in. We need to build and architect the telecom system, which is the lifeblood of where the data comes from, right? The information comes from sensors, it comes from devices that we're still very much in the process of building out in the grid. And then being very thoughtful about how we put that data together with a mind's eye to building AI applications and use cases on top of it. And that very much was one of these conversations that we were just having with our advisory board, because that's a problem that you got to solve now. You don't want to wait. I think we've seen it. There's many utilities out there right now that I would argue would articulate themselves as being data rich but information poor, right? And what that means to me is we jumped to the middleware, right? We built data lakes, we built huge data acquisition engines. Nobody knows what to do with it, right? And it's not correlated and structured in a way that's all that logical. And we need to take some of those steps while we're building the infrastructure to take full advantage of of AI.
Yeah.
That's very interesting. A final question in this series, and that is something that's very creative, very original to Anterix, which I know about, which is your ecosystem, this flotilla of like-minded but competitive companies. How does that, first tell us what it is, and B, how does it work, and how is it able to corral in the same place fierce competitors in a friendly way?
Yeah, no, it's something we're really proud of, Llewellyn, as you know. And so the ecosystem came about. It's back to this premise, as I said, we've always envisioned ourselves, in the outcomes or the solutions business, and that we're not the smartest people in the room, on every single grid application, nor have the bankroll to be able to drive R&D, like a Nokia or an Ericsson or a Motorola will. And it came about originally to spark that industrial logic of needing to bring some of these players together. But we very much had to tackle the challenge that you said, is we're intentionally bringing in players that do nothing but compete with each other, right? And have a history in their domain, of just an aggressive pursuit, and haven't collaborated really in a lot of ways. And I think how we've overcome that is by collectively educating ourselves on the meaningful mission of what we're here to do. And that, yes, there's business. I mean, you can't deny that. They see opportunity. There's future opportunities to sell their products and drive innovations in their roadmaps. But the meetings we have in the ecosystem gathering we hold every year, we do this around Distributech time. And this last year, I think we had 130 people in the room, and competitors, right, that are talking and collaborating and sharing ideas about where we go. And that it's a hallmark in that I think we can do that as a technology landscape, as cutthroat as business can be. Sometimes there's still place with the context of a mission that people can get around, that we can sit in a room and talk about what all could we do better, and listen and learn from the customer experience that our folks are going through, to be able to drive just kind of the next generation of where things go. I'll just offer one last thing, Llewellyn, is where we see it going is we're finding more now about where the scale of an individual utility company, can be highly augmented by collective activity, right? And this is a theme that we've spoken about for a long time. It's a lot of these vendors that work in this space are coming from the technology or coming from the telecom space, right? So they're used to working with an AT&T, a Verizon, a Vodafone, those kind of companies, massive scale in telecom and a very different skill set, in the customer that they're working with. And that utilities, as much as we thinking about them as very, very large energy companies, even the biggest like Xcel Energy, I mean, we're across like 8 states, they're deploying a network across. They're tiny in comparison, from a telecom perspective. However, if we bring and continue to bring, a collective alignment for multiple utilities together and try to do things in a way that's consistent, right? So some common standards, some common outcomes and ideas that we want to drive. We're absolutely believers, in terms of helping to support each other to be able to use the ecosystem in a different way, and to be able to help drive and influence a different set of outcomes.
What does Anterix offer the small utility? There are nearly 3,000 small utilities in this country, and some very, very big ones like Xcel. What does it offer the small utility? And does it give a disproportionate advantage to the big one that can afford it?
Yeah, I think we've always seen that, frankly, in the municipalities, in the co-ops. It's, I come from a background, not that different to Andres, kind of smart grid, smart metering, and it always struck me going through that journey, the needs are not different. I mean, the IOUs needs, and the municipalities and the co-ops needs aren't different. However, their capabilities and, even their financial, model is different, very different. You may have seen, we actually did a joint announcement with NRTC and Ericsson and Southern Link not that long ago. I think it's maybe a month and a half ago. And that gets right to the heart of your question, Llewellyn, is that what all of us that have been around this space for a while know is we have to have a more creative and more integrated model to be successful with municipalities and co-ops. It needs to feel more turnkey. In the financial package, obviously they're not motivated like an investor-owned utility to deploy capital. They need to manage to the municipal or the co-op budget. And NRTC, has been in the business of doing that for a long, long time. I see them as kind of the master translator, that they're able to take these big ideas, that have a relevance and get started more often than not in an IOU. And repackage it, in a very creative way, to be able to help it fit the needs of what the municipalities and co-ops are at. And that's been our model. I mean, and part of it's just practical business too for us. I mean, we're not a huge headcount company, right? We're 90 people, 95 people, something like that. And, we very much have made it our primary focus to use that effort to support the IOUs, in the complex journey that they've got to go through. So having a partnership, with a channel-like relationship with an NRTC has been a great way for us to drive kind of an exponential connection to, like you said, the thousands of co-ops that are out there, and help see them get some of the benefits that broadband can bring to their communities.
Yeah,
I want to piggyback real quick on that, because I want to remind the audience that NRTC, which is a special organization, sister or child of the National Rural Electric Co-op Association, NRECA, was really created for broadband purposes some 40 years ago. And the first thing that they did is they did a deal with DirecTV to provide internet, direct, and television infrastructure capability to rural co-ops. And I think that this deal is pretty similar in ways, because it's actually helping the co-ops reimagine how they develop the grid using private LTE and the spectrum of Anterix. So I hope that this is, which, this was announced on August 8th, I hope that a year or 2 years from now, those 900 co-ops are fully on board.
Yeah, let me go back to Llewellyn's. One of Llewellyn's questions about we got 3,000 plus units here, co-ops, and it's regulated by America. And for the most part, they don't, quote, talk to each other. For the most part, they do their own thing to get things done. We know that, and we have our own grid here in the state of Texas. And I just want to ask one question in terms of hooking things together, if you will. What I like to say on this program is that the grid is where computers were 50 years ago, or maybe 6 years ago. So my question is, how do you work with a regulated unit like that to make sure that the advances in technology will go on the grid and keep the grid safe? Because it must be a nightmare in trying to work with smaller ones, larger ones, and like Llewellyn just said, the variation in what they do and the size is great, but at the end of the day, we want everybody's lights to come on. So how do you work in a regulated industry like this and approach them, say in a unified way, all of a sudden about all of the great sudden technologies that's coming on that can enhance what they do?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, John. I mean, here's what we've seen. As much as I said, as our focus has been, kind of first and foremost on the IOUs, we've always paid keen attention to the reality that a lot, I'll say most, these co-ops and municipalities live under the very same footprint that these IOUs operate in. And we've had this concept. In fact, I think Morgan O'Brien probably coined it way before I started here, of envisioning this concept of a network of networks, we called it. You probably heard him talk about that. We're believers in it, and what it really means is that, yes, an individual network in a territory can be built, but the very technology and the very business model should be, that same network can provide benefit to the neighboring networks and can provide networking services to the other users and consumers that live in underneath it. And we're seeing the beginning, and this has been done, actually. This isn't a completely novel idea, right? Go look in Southern Company's territory. Southern Link, continues to be the crystal ball of what the art of the possible is, operating in a non-regulated sub, in Southern Link to provide telecom services both to the regulated utility, right? And the regulated utility owns some of those assets, and there's a model to be able to make that work. But then to be able to also provide services to other like-minded constituents, right? Like the local fire departments, the police departments, those kinds of groups. And I think it's an innovative model, that we can do good, while continuing to build these networks. And I'll say, to the extent that we are engaged with regulators, I'd say the bar is moving for utilities in the eyes of regulators. The idea of having a singular outcome, for a regulated investment, is not quite as appealing as it was before. We're seeing more engagement cross-sector regulation-wise. I wouldn't say the model's figured out yet, but the fact that there's conversations happening is interesting. And where we penned a paper, actually, specifically on rural broadband and the relationship, which kind of gets to a similar end as your question, John. And did work with the regulators to understand the value proposition of pieces of the architecture, right? Not going so far as to promote a utility, kind of becoming an ISP and competing, bringing, Wi-Fi communications and stuff to the home. But when you're deploying any network in rural America, there's a significant investment being made in the very fiber and the towers and the power supplies that make that possible. That is part of the business case problem for bringing, connectivity in rural, kind of real consumer Wi-Fi, broadband into rural America. And working specifically with the regulators to understand where the demarc point is in terms of how to treat a regulated asset versus how to enable models focused not on revenue generation, but on cost offsetting, to be able to allow some sharing of access and drive some motivations in a mutual way.
Mm-hmm.
I think, and let me just follow up. I think that the electrification of rural America it's going to be non-problematic, but I do think that the growth of data centers, we sit on the program and we talk about the importance of data, AI-driven data, data-driven by AI. Without great data, AI is nothing. So how do you look at, what can I say, the development of data centers,
Mm-hmm.
the impact that it's having on your business? Because I think if we look at what would take our electricity, let's just talk about keeping the lights on. And as I like to say, a lot of people are moving to Texas and nobody is bringing their electricity with them. So talk to me about, I don't know, data centers, energy capabilities. How do you manage that stuff? Because, for years and years, we've had rural electricity, and when broadband gets there, it's there. But we have not had for years and years data centers, right, souping up all of the electricity that is utilized to make AI go.
Yeah.
So how does that fit into your analog, your algorithm of your problems that keep you up at night?
I'm going to come back where you started that point, John. Where utility data centers are being targeted is really interesting, right? Obviously there's a complex rubric that these developers go through, about where and kind of why they want to build data centers in certain territories. But what I think we're finding is, that algorithm is trending into areas that are less built out, right? There's good energy supply, there's good infrastructure, there's good geographic property, and geography to be able to build these things on. But it's not necessarily where the energy supply was built, right? It's in a different place. And then there's the massive load side of these data centers. I've heard some stories, in a couple of utilities around single data centers, on a 5-10 year contract, consuming entire generating plants, like traditional generation, nuclear, hydroelectric, those kind of things. That scale is daunting, and it comes back to a point I was making earlier. I don't think the path out of this is exclusively just to build new generation, over and over and over again. I absolutely believe, things like, modular nuclear and, potentially some role of renewable energy with batteries and such, can play a function in it. But we have to continue to think about how to drive efficiency with just the base load that we've got and how we're ultimately using the grid. Because I do think we're going to get to a point, every kilowatt's going to matter. And, we're seeing it in some areas already that don't have all of the pieces, the amount of dispatchable load, when, you're effectively over generating, at the wrong point in time, as a function of what the demand side is going to be. And our ability to capture some of that, to help customers shift load like we've tried in this industry before, or to create more efficiencies, and it's a debate I've been having with some of our internal folks. When I think about AI, AI is super energy hungry, right? Super energy hungry.
Mm-hmm.
And at what point does the evolution of the technology get focused on energy management, versus just more processing, right? It seems like a logical competitive point at some point, that I'm going to increase the capability to generate compute at much more efficient energy use, as a logical evolution of scale. But all of that stuff comes to my mind as I'm thinking about how we better help a utility, with the complexity of energy management, the load growth, the role that broadband plays to give the real-time visibility, situational analysis, to control the grid, in the more dynamic way that all of those things are going to force us to do.
So let me
Ron, let me make this statement and then I give it to you. And I want Llewellyn to listen to it for his White House Chronicles thing too. John Sibley Butler says that the balance of global security would depend upon the security of data centers as AI goes forward. That the international balance of power and global security will now depend upon the data centers and the AI going forward. I'm not looking to blow up just manufacturing centers now. I'm looking to blow up data centers. And I'm talking
Data is the new oil, right?
and I'm just talking about for the security of America. So as we build data centers anywhere, if we're in a conflict and I'm the commanding officer, then I go after the data centers themselves because that takes out everything. So my question is, do you think that data centers are not only the new petroleum, the new oil, but also one of the most important things that must be protected in the international balance of power in the world? And I would like to hear Llewellyn, my distinguished elder gentleman from the White House Chronicles, who interviewed every question except that one that was just posed by John
That
Sibley,
is not entirely.
which really makes
Yeah.
Llewellyn
But
crazy because he didn't think of it. He didn't think of it. But he, in other words, he's still eating my dust.
As they said about someone else, impeccable veracity has not always been your hallmark. The fact of the matter is that I've done a lot of work on this and a lot of interest, one of which is that our present obsession with how fast electricity demand is going to grow from data centers at some point will be toppled, because there's an enormous amount of effort going into new forms of processing data, particularly photon chips, which may change everything because it won't require any or very, very, very little electricity. I think we're in one of those inflection points where we can only think of exponential demand. But historically, when we've seen exponential demand, there's been a technological breakthrough. One example, of course, is synthetic rubber. When there was such a demand, it looks as though the entire Amazon area would be under rubber trees so that we could have rubber tires on automobiles. Well, we didn't. We changed and we got synthetic rubber made from petroleum. So this is happening almost certainly. I was recently at a conference on AI and had a fascinating conversation by an executive who was with NVIDIA and is now with NTT, the Japanese tech giant. They are working very hard on a non-electric processor, which will change everything because you won't need the electricity. So that 2% of the national electric production, which is now going, which will probably rise to 4% if we stay on the curve we're on, that may go away. And utilities are just becoming aware of the fact that while they love the data centers on the one hand, because it's good, steady, simply built, I mean, what you want. If you're selling a product and you can sell it all to one person with one bill and one set of customer relations rather than thousands of people as utilities do, but change will happen. Technology will not be suppressed. When you get this much need for something, we will see a difference in how data is managed. I don't have any clue what it is, except that intuitively I feel will happen because historically it has always happened.
You're exactly right. And what we want to do is bring this issue to the forefront of the American scene and discussion and debates, political debates. Make it part of the president's message and your president's State of the Union address. With the exception of this program, and to an extent, the White House Chronicles, I listen to a lot of analysis in America about what we need, and nobody, Ryan, nobody comes on with a program and talent. What's going to happen when we run out of electricity? The crisis of electricity, the crisis of data centers, the need for data centers.
We are seeing some interesting examples.
Yeah, I have too, but it's just not happening. You ask somebody on the front, on the store, on the street, or guys I play golf with, as long as my light's coming on, I'm good.
Well,
So let me-
you might want to upgrade your golf partners, but that's your
But you know,
problem.
most of my members that
I
I play,
can't help you because I don't play golf any more than
most of the members
do
that I play
curling.
have runners to tell them the history of what's going on.
So let me
They
chime in
people to
too.
tell them what's going on.
Let me chime in to elaborate real quick, and then we'll switch to Ryan. So the data center story is that you should not be afraid of data centers going away or data centers being destroyed, because when you are a company and you have one data center or you're relying on a data center in the cloud, there's always a strategy for disaster recovery that can involve 1, 2, or 3, or 4, or 5 failure points. So in other words, Austin Energy has multiple data centers. So does any other utility, and they are all replicated and they all look identical. So you shouldn't fear that somebody will strike one data center and the whole thing will shut down. That will never happen. So let's just move on from that point. What's going to happen is the proliferation of data centers is going to go through the roof because of that element itself. So for example, Amazon released a couple weeks ago an announcement where just in the US, they're building $150 billion worth of data centers. That is a gigantic number. And Amazon obviously is one of the largest data center companies in the world. And they provide services to the Department of Defense to the tune of almost $400 million on data center work for the next 10 years. So what you will see then is also an acceleration of the amount of data that will be collected through the edge of everything that most likely will end up being on the mission critical infrastructure, leveraging private LTE using the Anterix network. So Anterix will be, 9,000 people 10 years from now or whatever it's going to be. And the edge will be collecting a lot of that data that needs to go into that data center. But the data centers themselves and the way they're being built so that they're resilient is that they're replicated. And so I don't see that there's a real risk there of losing anything.
Well, the real risk to data centers is not that they would be the targets, but that they would lose electricity. In modern warfare, before we take out the bridges, we try to take out the electric supply. It used to be the first thing you did in an invasion was to take out the bridges so that the enemy army couldn't move. Now you take out the electric supply so that nothing moves. All of the data centers become just big piles of chips if you take away the electricity. So that it's part of the same security problem, which is the security of electricity, which is part of modern defense. You secure your electric supply system or you are vulnerable. And that vulnerability has increased geometrically since the arrival of drones, cheap, undetectable, plentiful, and lethal. And it's going to cause a radical change in how we defend the electric system as soon as we see more concrete evidence, which we're going to get probably out of the war in Europe and possibly out of the Middle East. We have two wars which are sadly also turning out to be examples of where warfare is going. And it isn't in bigger ships and bigger tanks, and it's smaller this and finding really sensitive but terribly vulnerable points that can be struck, like power plants.
Yeah.
So I want to switch to something real quick. Ryan.
You're gonna let me get my 2 cents in on this issue?
Okay.
No. We've had your 2 cents and we found it wanting.
The great statistician from Germany said, there's no need to go into the underground. The probability of getting hit is like the probability of one elephant getting hit in Africa. So the probability is low. And they saw him running to the shelters. They said, where are you going, Mr. Statistician? He said, last night they got the elephant.
So Ryan.
So now you may move on.
Yeah,
Um,
Ryan, you guys,
Johnny, 3 cents for that one. 3 cents for that one.
Yeah.
Ryan, real quick, you are driving today a technology for the experts that is a three-way highway up and down symmetrical. So three highway lanes. It's a 3x3.
Yep.
And at some point, like everything, the highway will run out. So share with us your plans of growing the highway to 5x5 and what's going on in that, and what do you all anticipate in terms of as utilities wake up to the need of collecting more data? Where is the thinking?
Yeah, great question. We're building, use your highway analogy, we're building the first interstate, right? We're putting in the first few lanes, as we get this conversation started. And now that said, I mean, as we've been studying now use cases and demand curves across dozens and dozens of utilities, that 3-lane highway up and down is more than enough capacity for anything anybody's contemplating today. But that's not where this journey starts. You can look at any analogy to a carrier demand cycle, and everything will tell you once anybody is enabled with this kind of infrastructure, the devices and the use cases explode, right? It's an exponential growth curve as you see it. And so what we're working on right now that you're referring to, Andres, is paving the way for a 5x5 highway. When we're back in front of the FCC now, and I'll just say kind of uniquely this time around than the first time around, we're not alone. We had naysayers the first time around. I mean, there was folks that we had to convince, and this group of cowboys, had good intentions, for the activities that we were taking with the first 3x3. We now have co-petitioners, I think approximately 10 utilities that are with us at the FCC as we embark in the conversations to help bring what will be the future capabilities, a broadband expansion, and frankly, the benefit of the technologies we're talking about. It's built for this kind of stuff, right?
Sure.
Adding more spectrum and enhancing bandwidth is a core capability of the very technology that we're talking about, and which is another huge improvement over the status quo with a lot of utilities, where the idea of a leapfrog improvement in technical capability always started with a rip and replace conversation, as you've seen, Andres, right? That's not what we're talking about anymore. Kind of as we move to more bandwidth. Frankly, even as we move from 4G, which is the LTE technologies that we're really focused on, utilities are focused on today, it's a logical path to 5G. There's decisions that are being made in today's utility networks that are future-proof to 5G. The technology is inherently forward and backward compatible, and so there's ability to coexist and to be able to generate these roadmaps, which will set all this stuff up. And we're excited about it. I think getting the industry ready for the 5x5, paints a real picture of, I kind of come back to the partnership role that we try to take with this industry, to be stewards of good, to be able to keep looking forward, just not everything commercially orientated today. And that'll set the utilities up, I think, for a long time. I think a 5x5 network, built on 4G or 5G, that'll do a lot of good. I mean, there's a lot of different use cases that you can support that surely people haven't even dreamt of yet. So
Absolutely.
yeah, I'll make one other point, Andres, is coming back to the early one too. I think you made a really good entry to edge and the correlation here. I mean, we've been talking about macro AI, data centers. I'm not convinced that's where the utility use case is necessarily going to be focused on, and I think it does have a relevance to security. Think more micro AI, where you've got a distributed set of use cases that doesn't live in one single data center. It lives in thousands, if not tens of thousands of end devices doing microprocessing, of particularly in utility use cases where it's far beneficial to have the processing as close to the control point as possible, right? So that you can make decisions and actually effectuate commands. And that conversation started. We're in that conversation already. In the industry, as we look at some of the advancements that are coming next in areas around smart meters, in the next generation that are starting to be contemplated, certainly in DERMS or distributed energy management and the complications that comes with that. So I just wanted to highlight that because I think Andres, again, visionary, back to
Yeah. No, the processing at the edge. There is one partnership that I want you to talk about real quick, high level, your take. Of all your partners, the one that excites me the most, this is just me, the engineer, is Schweitzer Engineering Laboratories, primarily because they are a company, they have, you know, sort of conquered the minds of how the utility operates. And you guys have been kind of partnering with them and kind of pushing the envelope of what that grid of the future looks like. Anything you can share on that partnership?
Great company. It's, I didn't hit this earlier. I started my career at a utility, so I was a control and communications engineer for my local utility up in Manitoba, Manitoba Hydro. The blue boxes, as I refer to them, are everywhere, and they're there for a reason. I've gotten really familiar with Schweitzer Engineering Lab. I've got a great relationship with their CEO, and the reason you see these blue boxes everywhere is it's a company built on decades of depth of experience with utilities, where quality, risk, kind of longevity of solutions is their focus. And you see it in everything about how the company operates. So, the relationship excites me just because we're partnered, through the relationship with the ecosystem with what I would call one of the highest quality brands you can find in utilities, and they do amazing things. You've certainly all heard the falling conductor protection solution that's implemented out at San Diego, and so that was co-developed with San Diego Gas and Electric and Schweitzer Engineering Labs that, we were fortunate enough to participate, given there was a missing piece, in the technology stack, and that was high speed, wireless communications to be able to unlock that solution. And the robust process that they went through to qualify the solution and make sure that it was fit for purpose for putting it into production just continues to be the gold standard to me, of companies out there doing really quality work. And I'm hopeful, we'll continue to see advancements in that relationship, Andres, between us and them, but undoubtedly we'll be connecting to many more blue boxes in the future, at utilities to come.
Absolutely. Gentlemen, final thoughts. I'm looking at the time. Llewellyn.
I've got to catch an airplane, so I'm going to dodge out of this, but it's wonderful to talk to you again, Ryan. Very enlightening. The future belongs to engineering, and you're in the right place at the right time in the right profession. Unlike Johnny, but he's used to being in the wrong place at the right time, etc. It's lovely to see you. I do have to go. We're going to Paris tonight. I'm doing some consulting there, and I've got to go.
Nice.
Take care. Bye
Thank
bye.
you, Llewellyn. Safe travels.
Bye,
Really
Llewellyn.
great to see
John
you,
was the
Ryan.
one who
And
defined the profession.
one day you'll take me to a curling match and explain to me what is going on with the brooms and the stones.
You can count on it. I'd love to do it, Llewellyn. I would.
Only known in Canada and only understood in Canada. Its own secret society in public view.
Well, you can count this brother out of that curling stuff.
I've just had my editor has just corrected me. Scotland. Cheers.
Take care.
I love you, baby. See you now.
Butler,
Take care,
final
mate.
thoughts.
I think I just
I
think
gotta go. Sorry. Bye bye.
it's okay. I just think it's your industry is good, and I just think it needs to be advertised more. I think we got a lot of issues coming up just with the availability of electricity in the future, and I don't think it's on the national conscience at all. And we know, as my distinguished colleagues knows, that the issue certainly we can increase and build more power plants, but getting all of the the great stuff back on the grid, from power plants, from solar automobiles, and getting that safely back on the grid going forward. We had a great guest who talked about the autonomous community where they're off the grid completely, going back to the early 1900s. So it's very, very good that you're there. Thank you very much.
Ryan, thank you for being with us today. We keep watching you guys' journey, and we're big fans. And so Digital 360 Summit is coming up. We'll be highlighting a lot of your clients, and we'll be seeing you for sure at Distributech, if not sooner.
Got it. Thank you very much.
Take care. Johnny, take us away.
There's a yellow rose in Texas. I am going to see, and nobody else could miss her. Not half as much as me. She cried so much when I left her, like to broke her heart. And if I ever find her, you'll never fall. Sweetest rose in Texas will ever knew. Her eyes are bright as diamonds, they spark and glow. You may talk about your Clementine and sing of Rosalie, but the yellow rose in Texas is the only one for me.
Great job.
Thank you, Johnny. Always a
That's for the
pleasure.
Michigan win. That's for the Michigan win.
Thank you, guys.
All right, take care.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Bye now.
Okay.